All right, amazing. So we have Neerav Vyas here, who's been working in data analytics, data science for quite a few years, and we just wanted to dig in with him and understand, what does a data scientist do on a regular basis? How do you end up in this? And what are the right tools to use, and how do you communicate even what you do internally, which I'm sure is confusing to a lot of people. But
Yeah.
let's start off here with just your background and how you sort of ended up here.
Yeah, so I serve as the head of data insights and strategy for Homer Learning, mostly or kind of a team of product owners, data scientists, data analysts, data engineers. But my background is actually in strategy, innovation, and growth consulting, practically kind of helping clients to launch and relaunch new businesses, new products physically and digitally, increasingly helping them do customer-centric digital transformations, often, over the last decade and change, kind of moving more and more towards using advanced analytics, and so that's kind of like how I started shifting into the AI and data science space, but worked a lot with different agencies, CMOs, marketers across the world.
Okay, awesome. And that word AI gets thrown around a lot. Um, so, in your opinion, is there a good way how it should be defined, whether someone is actually utilizing actual AI instead of just sort of rules based insights and analytics versus actual AI? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on where that kind of separates, and or whether it's even important to separate it, and maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I separate out the rules-based kind of rudimentary stuff with any form of kind of data science, machine learning, right? Whether or not it's true AI or not, I think shouldn't matter. I think it's really about, can we get to a point where we're using analytics in a way that would help us to uncover patterns and make decisions that we would not normally have been able to do with a rules-based approach, or that we wouldn't have been able to do as humans alone, because we'd be looking at too narrow a set. So I think that's the important part, and I think it's really important to not get caught up on the hype on it, because a lot of times there is a lot of hype associated with what's being done.
Okay, I like that. I think so. Maybe a distinction there is if a human can build it right off the bat using pure code, maybe it's not real AI, and AI takes a while to kind of build up on its own.
Yeah, usually.
And run through a little bit on kind of Homer's product sets and how Homer integrates with customers, and then digging into, based on that, how does machine learning, AI, and data science speak to that as well? Because when you think of e-commerce or D2C or consumer-oriented products, sometimes you don't think that deep data science or AI is built into the decision making. So I'd love to learn more about that. So yeah, start off with just like the products, and then how your role kind of dovetails into helping with decisions on what to do.
Yeah, so for those folks who don't know us, we're an e-learning company. We focus specifically on early childhood education. We also had acquired a number of other companies over the course of our history, particularly a company called Seedling, which has a physical teddy bear product in the augmented reality space. So kind of predominantly subscription-based e-commerce product, but some physical goods as well. For us, actually, if you think about it as an early stage startup being very, very growth centric, the primary use case for advanced analytics and AI for us is marketing, right? So can we better
Okay.
understand CAC to LTV? Can we understand where we're acquiring customers from, where we can profitably acquire customers? Can we predict the lifetime of our customer, or the lifetime value of the customer relative to what it costs us to bring them in? And if we can do that, then we can optimize our spend efficiently, try to think about more responsible growth, and look at that balance between hitting our growth targets versus potentially wanting to hit margin or profitability targets, right? So that's really the predominant use case that we focus on. And the secondary use case is kind of on churn analytics, and then driving into personalization. So again, getting the customers is one part of the challenge, but on a subscription-based offering, monthly churn can kill us. So, thinking about how do we improve retention, how do we use their engagement with the product to understand, how do we drive new content, which content is resonating with individuals, and how do we use marketing and communications potentially to triage the likelihood of someone leaving. Like, for example, we know that if someone increases their usage with us week over week in the trial month that they're with us, their probability of leaving significantly decreases. So we're improving convert to pay, and therefore likely M1 retention. And then we know that certain types of engagement with content, free for all, a la carte content, rather than some pathways that we've created, If we get them to do that, they're much more likely to stay with us in subsequent months. So that's kind of a way that we've used the analytics to kind of guide marketing comms, but also to think about, how do we think about product development and think about experience.
Okay. And thanks for that, by the way, super helpful. And with that, are the analytics, is it more analytics or is it more data science? And do you feel like there should be a kind of discrepancy between the two, or it's just really vernacular? Because a
I
lot of
think
what
it's
you
both.
mentioned kind of, okay,
Yeah,
great.
I think the challenge that a lot of times with both data science teams, but also business unit teams, not be it marketing growth, regardless, right? It's getting to an algorithm isn't an answer, right? It's not a decision making process, right? It's the
Hmm.
very first step. It's taking that and saying, how might we engender a new experience? How might we reduce, churn? How might we improve personalization, right? Taking it to those steps, really integrating into business decision making, that's the challenge. So I think that, a lot of times folks come in and say, oh, I got you to a number, right? Or I got you a risk score with a person. And they don't take it beyond that to say, what do we do with this? How do we interpret this? How do we take this to potentially make a causal interpretation of what's going on? Or three steps forward, which is how are we going to A/B test this, right? Like, is it worth putting this model into production, integrating it into our app? Is the lift that we're going to get meaningful, right? I think those things start to really push the boundaries of data science, and good data science teams will begin to integrate that in, and they'll begin to have those conversations with their partners across the business to say, let's really, really dig into that. Because at the end of the day, if it's not driving decisions, if it's not driving tangible strategic insights, then it's going to be a fancy algorithm that doesn't really drive a lot of value. And a lot of those projects can become science experiments. And I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that you bring up you bring that up, that a lot of the criticism of data science teams, particularly for consumer products, is that a lot of what they're doing is pie in the sky and not not exactly actionable to say, oh, based off of this data, we're going to make decision A, B, C, or D, right? And so it's great that you're taking that extra step and not just saying, hey, here's some great charts, here's some great histograms, here's some great kind of data, but you're actually going one step further. It's like, okay, now based on the data, this is what we're going to do. Number one, number two, number three, number four, number five.
And look, I think that requires the teams to begin to develop an understanding of the business, right? And how they're going to work and how they're going to operate. The statistic I give out when I do talks is somewhere between 77% and 90% of advanced analytics projects fail. Right, 77% don't get industrialized or productionalized. If you're using the threshold as did it get
And define failed. What does that necessarily even mean?
Yeah, so the what Gartner reports is 77% won't get put into a product, or IT won't scale it up, and
Oh, wow.
90% of them won't actually make it into business operations or customer experiences. And I kind of use that as the actual threshold, right? Because if I didn't change operations, I don't change the way that my employees experience the world or my customers experience the world, then it really hasn't manifested itself to create a strategic impact. If that's the statistic, right? That means that the odds are against most data science teams when they're doing projects. And you
Mhm.
fundamentally have to go in to every single project with a high degree of skepticism. And what we found over the past 4 to 5 years is that if you take a design-led or human-centric approach to how you're coming through, and you're really being thoughtful about how are people going to use this, right? How is this how is it going to manifest itself in the business? How is my marketing team going to use it? How is my employee going to experience this? Right? How's my customer going to experience this, and how's it going to get integrated into my app or my product, right? Then you're much more likely to be thoughtful about how the recommendations are going to come in. You're going to become a willing partner in helping to shape those recommendations and turn it into something tangible. So I think that it's one of those areas where data science teams tend to think about things in terms of being very, very quantitative, analytical, and things like design thinking seem anathema to them. And I think it's actually the opposite, where that level of creativity will actually help them to understand their business partners better, and actually helps kind of make their solution much more viable.
Yeah, and hopefully it's also fun seeing the work you've done,
Yeah,
not just end up in a deck or a research paper or in a very academic-ish kind of endpoint, but more so, oh, hey, this is in the product I'm using on a day-to-day basis. We changed this algorithm, we changed this user experience, we changed this, whatever welcome screen based on all of this data. So
Yeah.
that's really useful.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll add in that I think it has one other additional benefit, which is it makes you like your employees and your colleagues more, right? Because you're much more collaborative in how you develop things. You're engendering stronger relationships. So it's funny because a lot of times teams will build these things and they'll be like, "Oh, I can't get anyone to use it," and I think part of that is that they don't bring that level of collaboration in earlier in the process. So those teams that operate in that manner, they have better relationships across the board.
It makes a lot of sense. And I guess the way you, and how do you create those relationships so you're not sort of just creating research in a silo, and that you are sort of able to communicate and understand what does the product team need, what does the marketing team need in terms of creating things that are going to be actionable and reach the end consumer? Are there any tips on how to make some of the um, work that you're doing more digestible or more actionable or anything like that? What have you learned maybe has worked and hasn't worked in those processes?
Yeah, so I have a background in both quantitative and qualitative research as well as kind of advanced analytics. So I actually spend the first part of projects that I'm doing well, doing a little bit of ethnography. So a couple of years back, a client of ours asked us to change how their financial forecasting function was going to work. And basically, they were like, "We don't think it's working well, but can you help us dig in, help us figure it out?" So we basically spent a couple of days being like, "What are they doing? What does a day in the life of the analyst look like? What are their pain points?" We then created an employee journey map. And then we created a customer journey map, in this case, the customers being their internal board, their internal members, right? And from that, we took that and said, okay, how do we then translate this into a data science solution? Where is data science applicable towards solving this problem? Or is it just a data and insights problem? Like, we don't need to over engineer this if we don't need that. And one of the key kind of findings that came out of it was it was taking them hundreds of hours to get to a number and forecast. And for most folks who've gone through QBR processes, monthly forecasts, quarterly forecasts, yearly forecasts, it took them hundreds of hours to get to just a number. And I'm saying that, I'm like, look, I know for a fact that I can make this process faster for you, easier, better, more accurate. I got it. Data science can solve this out. I think there's enough meaningful value here that we're going to do that. But I get you to that number. So what? What do you do with it? Right? And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you get us to a number, right, we want to understand why that number's there. We want to understand what levers we can change to potentially alter that number. Like, if we spend more marketing dollars, is that going to help get us to a higher growth target, a higher margin target, right? We want to do simulations, what if work. I was like, all right, cool. Now I understand what you're doing with that, like what's truly valuable, right? So I might not be able to solve all that for you, but if I know what you're going to do with it, I can build it in a way that it will be more valuable for you, right? And it's much more likely to make you enjoy what you're doing and for you to provide more strategic value to our senior leadership team. So, it's not a concrete set of steps, but I think if you're approaching it from that way, in terms of like, how do I really understand the context that's coming in here, and how do I design to solve for the broader business need and broader business problem, right? I think you get to something more meaningful. And I think it's the same way that good product teams design good products, right? You're looking at that underlying need of the consumer, not literally taking what the consumer is telling me, and you're trying to figure out and say, what's the right way to solve for these pain points? How can I create something that's going to be more durable than just like giving them a horse when what they need is a car, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for that. That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I run a firm that focuses on talent. So, if a company is kind of hitting that point to hire data scientists, actually, number one, how do you know you've hit a point where you should actually bring in someone who's focused in data science? My best assumption is it's not one of your first 5 hires in a company. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because it might be. But how do you know when you're hitting that point? And then number two, when you do decide that you need to hire this person, what are you looking for within this hire?
Yeah, I mean, I think unless the company is going to be heavily analytics centric, shouldn't be an early hire. In that case, you probably have a founder who's got a strong background there, so less of a pertinent need. I think about it in two directions, right? Which is, are we going to start first from kind of just getting a data foundation in place, right? And if I just need to get the pipes running, basic analysis and stuff like that, then you probably don't need to bring the Ferrari in, just a true data scientist, and they're probably not going to be happy, so they're going to leave. So I think it's understanding where you are in that journey. But as you get to that point where the insights work that you need, right? Either A, the company is now large enough and there's a critical mass of data. You've been running for a year or two, got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of customers, and there's a lot of data to analyze.
Let's stop right there. So are you kind of saying tens to hundreds of thousands of users is maybe the baseline of when to start thinking about when to hire this person?
Again, I'm going to caveat it slightly, right? Which is, if you were a subscription-based physical service, right, and the number of data points that you have coming in is relatively low, then most analyses that you're going to be able to do can be handled through off-the-shelf solutions. You can use an Amplitude, for example, right, or an Vertical, right? Your CDP platform, some of these out-of-the-box startup-centric analytics solutions can actually serve you for a fair amount of time, and they'll be really, really cost-effective for those first couple of years. So you may not need that data scientist, right? But on the flip side, if you're someone like us, where there's a lot of data coming through, you've got tens of thousands of engagement points coming in, you're going to end up needing a data scientist or data science team sooner rather than later. So I think there's the nature of the business and the volume of the data and how granular you're getting with the interactions, right? That'll kind of judge where you're at. And then the second point I would make is that as you get in, a lot of organizations come in and hire data scientists that are super junior. My advice would be try to find someone that's a little bit more experienced and more senior, right? Because you hire someone junior, they're not going to be able to really lead their way. And if the team itself doesn't have a lot of experience with analytics products, then you're not going to be able to give them meaningful guidance. So there's a tendency for a lot of wheels to be spinning, right? So I think it's one of those things where that initial hire, you may want to get someone who's a little bit more expensive than the kind of the analyst right out of school or analyst right out of the boot camp.
Okay, which also speaks to the point of, this shouldn't be one of your first 5 hires. It's when you do have the capability to afford someone good and and not only afford someone good, attract someone good, right? To do what you do, you probably are a bit handicapped if the sample sizes of data are not very large, right? If a company has 150 customers, you might be pretty handicapped on what you're able to do for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly the earlier you are in your journey and the smaller you're looking at it, if you're not only is the sample size going to be in there, but you basically don't want to bring a data scientist that's going to think a neural net or an artificial intelligence algorithm is the answer to every solution, right? A/B testing works really, really well for a very long period of time. So I think it's also an issue of like, you're going to bring in a hammer, you're going to need guidance to make sure that everything doesn't look like a nail, right?
Okay, awesome. And then when you are ready to hire this person, you already mentioned your first hire shouldn't be too junior. What are certain things you look out for when talking to different candidates, and where you understand, okay, this person is or is not the right fit to join a startup?
I think the fit on the startup is more about the culture of the startup itself, right? So I think culture fit is always going to be really important, particularly if they're early on or one of your first data science hires, right? That integration with company fit, I think, is an aspect that will vary company to company. One bit of advice I would give is that, and again, I come from the consulting space, so obviously heavily biased, but I take all of my data scientists through what we would call case interview fits. And the reason I do that is not because I want to take a McKinsey or BCG-esque approach on the case interview, but what I'm actually testing for in that is, are they creative in terms of solving out problems and thinking about the business need, right? And if they can think out the box there, if they're willing to kind of work through and understand the business context of things, like they're going to ask the right questions back to you as they're going through that for me showcases their ability to tackle a whole host of different problems, particularly early on in the startup. Like, lots of things are going to go wrong, right? Like, we're going to be scrappy in lots of different ways. If they can think outside of that box, right, then that for me is an indication that they're going to be able to be flexible and durable for a lot of the things that are going to come out. And so that's kind of like the mantra that I hold with, not only here at Homer, but I kind of use that across companies that I've worked with, big and small. And I tend to find that those teams serve me really well. And it also means that I'm not using a team of 20 to solve a problem. I'm using a very small team, that's going to be focused on the things that are most important.
Makes a lot of sense. I don't like the fact that you put in that case study. I guess is a little bit more management consulting-esque, just to show creativity instead of just using a template. And then also, no matter what you're doing, the same, you're supporting a stakeholder, right? And so, can this person actually show creativity in in creating a solution or solving a problem that's going to please the stakeholder, instead of just, as you mentioned earlier, kind of utilizing whatever the coolest technology is and building a neural net for no reason. Any advice for people who want to get into data science? It's a pretty hot field right now in terms of people trying to pivot into it. Would love to hear what has made data scientists good, that you've worked with. So someone who is trying to get into it can learn what makes them good, and then other general advice for how to get into it.
Yeah, I would give them two broad pieces of advice and guidance. Right, one is try to avoid being enamored with the technology itself. Right, the technology is a tool to an end outcome. Right, and if you focus on what those outcomes are, you're going to be much more likely to be successful and happy as a data scientist. The caveat I'll say there is, if you really, really want to do cutting edge data science, self-driving cars, stuff like that, you probably want to get a PhD. There's going to be a small subset of firms that are recruiting in that area, and you're going to need a very deep theoretical foundation to come through. 98%, 99% of the world doesn't need that. And so, from that perspective, you're going to be using a lot of open source tools. You're going to leverage that to get to a business outcome relatively quickly. So think of that as that's your goal, right? So you're going to stay on top of a lot of new frameworks. You're going to understand what's going on in that community, but it's not necessarily creating things from scratch, right? And I think you need to understand where you can leverage what's available rather than rebuilding what's new and getting familiar with that. The second thing I would say is for folks who are trying to get in or doing career switching, whatever it ends up being, I think a lot of the boot camp programs that have come out are really, really good. I think they do an excellent job on getting folks ready for that. So folks like the Metis Boot Camp, I'm a huge fan of. GA does a great job. So not only do they teach you what you need to know, but they're really, really focused on what's your job going to actually look like, right? And what your boss is going to need you to do, and they get you ready for that, so you can hit the ground running. So I wouldn't underestimate them. Definitely, a lot of really good boot camps that are in there. And I would focus on talking to some of the alumni who've gotten recruited from there, who've gotten jobs. And I think they'll give you an idea of how ready they were on day one.
I love that. I think some people who feel like they did get a CS degree from, a top tier school, they're kind of SOL when it comes to this career path. But you're saying no, you've worked with, seen, interacted with people who've come out of the boot camps and felt like they were able to do their job well and learn and grow.
I mean, 3/4 of my team at one point at Capgemini had been recruited out of one of two boot camps. So, I think that's a testament to how much we trusted them. And I'll also add, for folks who are not from a STEM background, some of the best hires I've ever had, right, had design backgrounds or were arts majors who switched into it. And that level of creativity was fantastic. I myself, I'm an international relations econ major. So you can maybe argue the econ is math, but I am very much arts and sciences as well. So again, I would suggest to folks who don't have a STEM background, don't be afraid of it. There's a ton of value you can provide, just bringing that other perspective.
I love that. That's great advice. And yeah, I think of econ in the humanities kind of like realm, so I agree with what you're saying.
We're equally hated by both parts of the world. So
that's a very good point. That's nice. You're trailblazers. Cool. I think I've kind of dug into everything that I have. I don't know if you have any sort of like exciting, like kind of groundbreaking closing statements here to tell everyone about the world of analytics, data science, and so forth. But
I will just say that for marketers and growth marketers, it's going to be a really interesting 2 to 3 years with all the changes that are happening in the landscape. So I think everyone just got to understand they got to roll with the punches. A lot is going to change. Just expect it, and try to be as flexible as possible. Because between Apple, Google, California, the landscape is literally shifting underneath our feet. So on the plus side, it'll be exciting for everybody.
How is it shifting, do you think, or any predictions on how it'll shift in the next 24 months?
Yeah, I mean, look, with CPRA moving forward, for those folks who don't know that, it's California strengthening their CCPA law, their privacy laws, to be stronger than GDPR. And in particular, they're telling folks that are sharing data, not just selling data, that they're going to have an increasing degree of scrutiny against them. I think what it's going to mean is that sending data out of our ecosystems to our advertising partners to do matches, to do attribution, is increasingly going to be restricted, if not prohibited. Apple has already said with their deprecation of IDFA that they don't want you sending data out to third parties unless the customer is explicitly opted in. So I think what that's going to mean is a lot more folks are going to have to pull things onto their platforms. Primary data is going to become much more important, and creating that data foundations, both from an analytics perspective, but from a platform perspective, is going to be increasingly important. The problem is that CPRA hasn't been fully written yet. So over the course of the next 12 to 14 months, we're going to get more and more guidance on what it's going to look like. So there's landscape itself is shifting. But I would expect that if you're building kind of in-house first-party solutions or building within your private cloud, you're going to be safer, because sending things out is going to become harder and harder.
Makes a lot of sense. They're evening the playing field so that hopefully the companies with the best products can sell more of those instead of the companies with the best marketers. I think that's the direction all the platforms are trying to go in.
I think there's always a room for really good marketers. I think it's just going to get marketers to realize that they're going to have to be a lot more creative. But you know what? Look, I think that the one silver lining around all of this, right, is that in the last 7 years, as we became more performance centric, right, it was really easy to do insights on folks that we had direct attribution on, and so we lost sight of the holistic sense of marketing that we have. Right, our earned and kind of non-performance related paid marketing kind of fell by the wayside because we couldn't measure it easily. And I think now it's going to require us to take more of a holistic approach to saying these things were always really valuable, maybe even became more cost effective because demand for those channels were a lot lower. And so they didn't scale up in CPM as high as performance marketing did. So I think it's just going to get folks to be a little bit more holistic and realize that they can reach for some of those other tools, right, without feeling like they're going to be judged negatively, because performance marketing itself is going to get leveled out relative to TV and kind of PR. So I'm optimistic that the new world will eventually be better for everybody.
I am too, and I think it'll make everyone try harder and be a little more creative, and it will be a little more thoughtful and less hacky.
Yes,
less hacky in a black hat way, maybe more hacky in a creative, reach people where they are kind of way. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
And build real relationships without having to worry, like, if this thing doesn't go viral, like, I failed, right? Like, because we don't want to feel like that either.
No, and I think luckily, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, I've had less conversations with founders who just hire someone who's going to make it go viral. I'm like, it's not going fucking viral. You sell insoles for shoes. That's not going fucking viral. Figure out how to build a good product and figure out how to sell it to people who want what you want, but it's not going viral.
Yeah, and then think about your brand and positioning your brand, right? And I think that hopefully that'll become much more important.
I hope so as well. Amazing. Well, thanks for taking the time here, and thank you again.
Thank you, Nisha. An absolute pleasure. Thanks again. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.